Hello, this is Roger Weston. Are you being brainwashed? Are people around you being brainwashed? I'm going to tell you a story about how George Blake, a British vice consul was brainwashed. I'm going to provide you evidence that not only are you likely being brainwashed, but how people all around you are being subjected to brainwashing. And I'll do it very quickly, and the evidence will be undeniable. And finally, I'm going to show you how a boy saint could not be intimidated, and how he crushed all attempts at intimidation, even to the point of death in the arena facing lions. So let's get started. Hit that like button. And George Blake was a British vice consul stationed in Korea. In 1950, Seoul was overrun by the communists, and George Blake and some other diplomats were taken prisoner, and they were held for several years. For 3 years, George Blake was subject to brainwashing as a prisoner. It was a constant source of brainwashing. And then one day, George Blake, he tried to escape, and they brought him back, and they put him up against a wall, and he faced a firing squad. And George Blake was looking at this firing squad, and his life was flashing right in front of his eyes, and he realized he was about to die. They were about to fill him with bullets, ripping out of his back, leaving big holes in his back as they ripped out the backside. And George Blake, as the wall was splattered with blood, George Blake knew he was going to collapse dead right there. And his life, which he thought was so valuable, was suddenly going to be nothing. George Blake realized that his life wasn't worth 2 cents at that moment. And then all of a sudden, he screamed out, and I'm going to give you a quote of what he said. George Blake said, in Russian, he said, because he was a British vice consul, but he had learned Russian in Cambridge. So he shouted out, I am not a spy. I am a civilian internee, a British diplomat. I went out of my camp at Monpou and lost my way. Now, because he made this desperate plea in Russian, they canceled the firing squad, and he was taken aside, and they treated him humanely, and they saved him. They let him live. So later on, after he was freed, Blake went back and he got into MI6, right? This is the British secret intelligence arm. And so he became a spy for Britain. Now, from this time on, Blake was spying also. He was a double agent. He was also spying for Russia. And so what happened to Blake? What happened was on that day on the firing squad, it appears that he found himself. He faced death, and he found himself. All of that brainwashing seems to have come home to roost, perhaps. And then he was shown mercy. So there was a sympathetic, the Russians seemed sympathetic, and they won him over. All that brainwashing paid off. George Blake became a Russian spy, spying against his own country. Everything in headquarters at MI6, he photographed and passed on to the Russians. So he sold his own country out for Russia. Now, perhaps you're thinking, sure, but George Blake was subjected. He was a prisoner of war. He was subjected to constant brainwashing. That doesn't affect me or the people around me. Well, you may know better. I think a lot of people these days have some idea of what's going on, but I'm going to give you some basic evidence. I'm going to give you some proofs, clues, evidence that brainwashing, and you're going to recognize immediately that, yes, you are being subjected to this stuff constantly. So, number one, do you think about certain messages, say crazy messages coming from let's say, school boards and the media, the mainstream media, and things like that? Are you constantly thinking about these somewhat offensive or radical ideas that are challenging your own beliefs? And you think about it because you can't really help it, because they're constantly bombarding you in advertising, whether it's beer advertising for light beer or whether it's in the schools, or in the classrooms, or whether it's from the news. We're constantly bombarded with these outrageous messages. So have you experienced anything like that? That, if so, that's an evidence that you're under some brainwashing. Does it, when these things happen to you, when these messages hit you, are you visualizing it? I mean, when thoughts hit us, it's hard to have that happen without images flashing that line up with the pictures that are coming at us. So have you, is that happening? Do you talk about it? I mean, do these controversial ideas that keep coming up, are you tempted to just talk about it and vent your frustrations with them? Or are people around you doing it and you don't really want to hear it, but you can't really avoid it because it keeps coming up with people around you? Those are symptoms of brainwashing, evidences of brainwashing. Have you heard linking ideology with a noble purpose? These crazy, maybe offensive ideas, and yet they're being linked with noble purposes. Have you seen anything like that? Like, if you don't believe this way, then you're not a good person. Or if you do believe this way, then you're righteous and you're better than everyone else around you because you're a good person. Those kind of linking ideology with a noble person. Have you heard anything like that? How about public confessions? Now that may seem extreme. Of course, I'm not suggesting that you went out in public and made a confession, but have you seen somebody else perhaps maybe try to maybe make a public confession, like saying they are ashamed of their own race, for example, or ashamed of their own country? Have you heard anything like that happen? Probably not, but if you have, that would be, I've certainly heard it. Have you heard any public confessions? Even presidents, or diplomats, saying bad things publicly about their own countries. That kind of thing, public confessions. These are symptoms of brainwashing. Duty to judge and criticize others is another symptom. Have you seen any canceling going on, or people criticizing, feeling like they have a duty to criticize others who disagree with them on a public or even less public, but just in general? Have you seen that kind of thing going on? These are all evidences and symptoms of brainwashing. Have you or anyone you know, have people around you been subjected to these kinds of influences in our cancel culture? Right? Now this is taking it to a whole new level, but someone like George Blake may very well have been forced to write and rewrite the ideas over and over. Now that's a little more active than passive. So I don't know. Do you see anything like that going on? I don't know. I don't know about that one. But I do see, it is true that students certainly write and rewrite this stuff all the time. So maybe ask your kids about it. Okay, are we acting out our new behavior? Okay, are we role playing these new behaviors and these ideologies and beliefs? And that's kind of the last one I have here. So those are just some evidences. Do any of them sound familiar at all? Because if so, then people are, those are evidences of brainwashing. Now let me finish up by saying this. Not everybody is subjected. Not everybody is going to fall for this. In fact, some people aren't going to back down to intimidation. One example of this is a young boy saint named Germanicus, who during the Roman times was thrown in the pit with lions, and he had a chance to deny his faith and save himself. But instead, he had no interest in that. In fact, Germanicus not only would not deny his faith, but the lions for some reason didn't want to attack him and so Germanicus actually provoked the lions. He provoked them so that they'd come at him and attack him and kill him. And that was some real boldness, that in the face of intimidation and threats, he did not back down, but in fact, he provoked those lions and died not only a martyr, crushing fear, but he is now known as Saint Germanicus. So thanks for watching. It's Roger Weston. Fight on. God bless.